When writing Python programs, there are times you want to iterate over a list and access each item individually. Let me show you. So I'm going to declare a list of numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, if we print this list, it comes out exactly how we wrote it, using the square bracket notation. But what if we wanted to print each item on a separate line? This is where we use the for loop, and here is how. So we're not going to print the entire list. Instead, we're going to type for, and now we declare a variable, which is called a loop variable. Let's call it item, and then we type in numbers next to add a colon to start a block of code. So this is what we call a for loop. With this for loop, we can iterate over all the items in this list. In each iteration, this item variable is going to hold one value. So in the first iteration, item is going to be equal to 1, and the second iteration is going to be equal to 2, and so on. So now if we print item and run our program, we see each item on a new line. So this is how we use a for loop. Now we could also achieve the same thing using a while loop, but our code will be a little bit longer. Let me show you. So we would have to start by declaring a loop variable outside of our while loop. Let's say I, we set it to 0. Now we say while I is less than. Here we need to find out how many items we have in this list. So we use the len function, len of numbers. So as long as I is less than the length of the list, print. Now we can use the square bracket notation to get the element at this index. So numbers of I, now we need to increment I by 1. So I equals I plus 1. Let's run the program and see what we get. So we get the number 1 to 5. These are coming from our first for loop. And then we get the number 1 to 5 one more time. These are coming from our while loop. Now if we compare these two approaches, we can definitely see the implementation using the for loop is shorter and easier to understand. You do not have to use the square bracket notation, we do not have to call the len function, we do not have to declare a variable, a loop variable, and then increment explicitly. So with the for loop, in each iteration, the item variable will automatically hold one value in this list. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about the range function in Python. We use the range function to generate a sequence of numbers. Let me show you. So we type range. This is a built-in function just like the print and input functions. Here we can pass a value like 5, and this will return a range object. A range object is an object that can store a sequence of numbers. Let me show you. So let's call that numbers. So this is a range object. In this object we're going to have the numbers 0 to 5, but excluding 5. Now if we print numbers, we're going to see this message, range of 0 to 5, not the actual numbers because this is a default representation of a range object. To see the actual numbers, we need to iterate over this range object using a for loop. In the last video, you learned how to iterate over a list using a for loop, but we can also iterate over a range object using a for loop. Basically, we can use a for loop with any object that represents a sequence of objects. So instead of printing numbers, we're going to use a for loop. For number in numbers colon, we're going to print number and take a look. Now we see the numbers 0 to 4. So range of 5 generates a sequence of numbers starting from 0 up to the number we specify here. Now if we supply two values, the first value is going to be considered the starting value, and the second value is going to be considered the ending value and is going to be excluded. So range of 5 to 10 is going to generate numbers from 5 to 9. Take a look. And there you go. Now we can also supply a third value and that will be used as a step. So let's say instead of having a sequence of numbers like 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9, we want to jump 2 numbers at a time. So 5, 7 and 9 and so on. So here we pass 2 as the step. Take a look. So we get these odd numbers 5, 7 and 9. So this is the range function in Python. Like quite often you see the range function used as part of a for loop because we don't really need to store the result in a separate variable. We can call the range function right here where we were using the number variable. So we can type range of 5 and this will return a range object holding the numbers 0 to 4. Take a look. And there you go. So we don't really need to store the results in a separate variable like numbers. And there you go. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about tuples in Python. Tuples are kind of like lists. We use them to store a sequence of objects, but tuples are immutable, which means we cannot change them once we create them. Let me show you. So I'm going to start by defining a list of numbers 1, 2, and 3. Now we use square brackets to define a list and parentheses to define a tuple. So now this numbers variable is stored in a tuple. If we try to reassign, let's say, the first element, we're going to get an error. Tuple object does not support item assignment, so this is what I meant by tuples are immutable. They are unchangeable. Also, if you type numbers dot, you don't see any method like append, insert, remove, and so on. We only have count and index. Count returns the number of occurrences of an element. For example, if we have 2 3s in this tuple and call count of 3, this will return 2. The other method we have here is index, and this returns the index of the first occurrence of the given element. Now these other methods you see here that start with an underscore, they are called magic methods. It's an advanced topic, so we will skip that for now. So tuples are immutable. We cannot change them once we create them. Now practically speaking, most of the time you would be using lists. But there are times that once you create a list of objects, you want to make sure that somewhere in your program, you or someone else is not going to accidentally modify that list. If that is the case, then you should use a tuple.